Willie Pep once won a round without throwing a single punch. His defense was so impressive, and his command over his opponent so obvious that the judges felt he had displayed complete control throughout. And if this surprises you, then it's probably just because you've never seen him fight. Pep fought 241 times in his career, winning 229 of them. His incredible footwork, head movement, and grappling all helped him to become widely acknowledged as likely the best defensive fighter of all time. As Pep himself was fond of saying, "He who hits and runs away lives to fight another day." Pep has inspired countless martial artists, and his style has recently had a resurgence in MMA. Last time, we took a look at how Pep used his masterful footwork to confuse and bewilder his opponents. This time, we'll look at how Pep incorporated bizarre head movements into his complex footwork to create mind-boggling combinations and patterns. These sequences made Pep so elusive that he would often cause world-class fighters to clumsily stumble into the ropes, as if it were their first time trying to throw a punch. In the last breakdown, we covered how Pep could move in any direction at any time. While most fighters keep in one stance, orthodox or southpaw, Pep fluidly moved between the two by shuffling. When Pep's feet came together, it was near impossible to tell which way he would go. He could C-step back to switch stances, driving an opponent into his new rear hand. B-step forward to change stances, taking a new angle outside, or simply rebound back to rapidly counter. Pep had complete freedom of movement. If fighting were chess, he would be the queen, able to move in all directions at any time, while his opponent adhered to the usual conventional patterns. In this way, Pep could effortlessly take superior angles and trick his opponent into hurling attacks in the exact wrong direction. Add on the fact that he danced with a broken rhythm, moving from side to side and front to back to hide his true intentions, and it's easy to see how competitors were at times made to look straight up intoxicated. And these unpredictable angles also let Pep walk opponents right into his punches. Now let's look at the next layer of complexity in Pep's style, his head movement. At first glance, Pep's head movement itself may appear to be fairly simple. Rather than weave underneath hooks, Pep tended to simply crouch down to either side, pinning his head to his opponent's hip. One of his favorite techniques was to glide his head from his opponent's hip to the outside of his shoulder, steering them off balance as he flanked them to take a dominant angle. Normally, this would be far too predictable to work with any consistency, but astonishingly, Pep changed stances and angles as he crouched and as he returned to his normal posture. Being able to pull off such complex footwork in an upright, narrow stance is impressive enough, but with a deep crouch, it's unbelievable. These unique abilities meant that it was near impossible for an opponent to predict exactly where Pep would be right after he dodged a punch. Put another way, if Pep's opponent so much as blinked mid-punch, it might appear to him as if Pep had suddenly teleported behind him. To understand how he did this, let's first take a brief look at how head movement and footwork usually go together. 99% of fighters step to the same side that they move their head. Watch Tyson. He weaves left and steps left as well, or weaves right and steps right. This sets up an angle and loads his return counter with power. This is the normal, some might say natural way that a human being moves. Now here's Pep. Yeah. Pep would crouch the opposite direction that he was moving, making for one of the most confusing situations that fighters have ever had the misfortune to deal with. One of his favorite ways to do this was to crouch as he shuffled his feet together, fluidly pivoting into a southpaw stance. Because Pep crouched to the inside, his opponent aggressively followed him in that direction. Meanwhile, Pep was already stepping outside, letting his competitor fly past him in the wrong direction. Pep would many times help his opponent out by wrapping his arm around his waist and placing his lead foot on the inside of his. This tactic gave the impression to many of a matador skillfully sidestepping a bull. Of course, he could do this the opposite way as well, crouching outside while stepping inside. And don't forget, Pep could exit in any direction once he'd finished his crouch as well. What this meant was, not only could Pep step in any direction at any time, he could also do the same with his head, his trunk moving independently from his body. This is the same principle mentioned with footwork, complete freedom of movement. Experienced fighters know that they have another fighter trapped in certain positions. They know that there are a limited number of defenses and attacks possible at any given time. But with Pep, this all went out the window. He could do literally anything at any moment, and do it well. Another impressive trick that Pep could pull off seemingly at will was to step deep inside as he crouched to dodge his opponent's rear hand, moving so far past his competitor's centerline that he essentially switched both his and his opponent's stances. Some may recognize this tactic from the breakdown on Tyson. By moving so far past his opponent, Pep placed himself and his competitor in southpaw, where he was perfectly comfortable fighting, and his opponent was not. Always playing with different sequences, Pep would sometimes combine this technique with the first one we covered, stepping and crouching deep inside before suddenly pulling back outside. And because Pep's opponent never knew what to expect, it made it much easier for Pep to pull off more conventional attacks and counters at will. If all of this wasn't enough, Pep was also excellent at manipulating his opponent's balance with grappling. Pep also used long guard tactics like a Muay Thai fighter. He would control his opponent's arms and frame against their shoulder or head to turn them while moving offline, using their own more orthodox head movement against them as he broke every rule in the book with his own. It should be clear by now that Pep wasn't just fancy footwork. He was a whole and complete fighter who used every element of martial arts to express his own unique, timeless style of fighting. If you want to learn more about Pep's style, you can check out my new ebook, Aggressive Defense: The Blocks, Head Movement, and Counters of Boxing, Kickboxing, and MMA. Out now and linked below. From the Modern Martial Artist, this has been David Christian, wishing you happy training.